Hey everybody, we are in the month of Halloween still, so we are covering horror movies, naturally, and today we are talking about The Ring. This film came out in the year 2002. It was directed by Gore Verbinski. Verbinski was quite the prolific filmmaker in the first decade of the 2000s. He established himself, I would say, as kind of a mainstream movie chameleon, making horror films like The Ring, of course, and then, big, popular, campy adventure movies, rousing adventure films like Pirates of the Caribbean, which is, of course, a very successful franchise. And even animated films like Rango, which, I thought was really underrated. I thought that was a very cool movie. Originally, The Ring was offered to David Lynch, which that's intriguing information to know, but unfortunately, he turned it down. So Verbinski watched the Japanese, the original Ringu, and he was really impressed with it, really impressed with the style of it, and he ended up being the one to direct this remake, The Ring, and this, I think, was his first big breakthrough. This was a huge, huge hit. I remember at the time, I was 12 years old when this movie came out. Everybody at school was talking about it. I was watching it with my best friend at the time, and I remember while we were watching it, in the middle of the movie, her nose started bleeding. And of course, if you've seen the film, you understand the significance of that. Needless to say, I couldn't be in a room that wasn't well lit for about 2 weeks after that. The movie was terrifying, I think, to so many people, in particular because of the mood of it. It is a clearly very minimalistic approach, and it includes a lot of avant-garde imagery. And there's a maturity to it. There's a reliance on actually wanting to build the tension and build the story and the characters rather than going for a lot of the easy jabs and the jump scares. Returning to it as an adult naturally is kind of strange because there are a lot of childhood memories that rush to the surface, and though now I have to say I see it in a very different way, I was struck this time by just how solid this movie is. It is a really, really good film. A very intriguing movie. In a lot of ways, I see it very much as a zeitgeist kind of piece and also something that did touch a nerve at a certain point in time. But I also am very interested in the metaphysical interpretations of it. It is kind of a manifestation of our relationship with film as an art form and our relationship with it as it relates to technology, how we experience it through different mediums and all of that. So I see The Ring almost as like this generation's Videodrome in a lot of ways. And when you watch The Ring, especially when you get to the part where you actually get to see the tape in its entirety, it's a very strange kind of Freudian abstract thing. It reminds me a lot of an iconic short film, silent film called Un Chien Andalou. That is, of course, a very famous film, one that I have reviewed in the past, but I think what is so important about it is how it really does, it's one of those movies that does draw a correlation between the dream state while you're asleep and how that relates to films and film imagery, and how there really isn't that much of a difference between the ideas in your dreams and the ideas in movies. And the movie, of course, was written by Salvador Dali and Luis Buñuel, and they saw it merely as a film about dreams, or just using a lot of the dream imagery that they remember and bringing it to life. There's a lot of nightmarish imagery, some quirkiness, but it's all kind of strung together, and there's not really a concrete plot or anything like that. And people, of course, have analyzed it to death over and over and over again over time, and I think that, well, especially with Buñuel and Dali, they were very disappointed by that. They didn't want people to read too much into it. They felt it kind of misses the point that you're not supposed to take it seriously. And sure, I mean, you could argue that it doesn't mean anything, but just by me watching, I'm going to attach my own ideas onto it based on my experience living life and my experience watching it. I think the imagery says a lot about them, whether they're conscious of that or not, and whether there was intent for that or not. There's a lot of sexual frustration, clearly some androgyny symbols there, and homoerotic curiosity. Masculinity being a prominent image in that, and maybe the fear of femininity. And I don't really think you need to overanalyze it or anything like that to be able to pick this stuff out. And in a way, I almost see the tape that is in The Ring almost like Un Chien Andalou in a lot of ways, because it is that sort of abstract experimental piece, like a short film, that is being passed around in the modern day as this sort of ancient piece of media, as a videotape, which is kind of interesting. That is kind of a nostalgic thing. I mean, I remember when I was watching the film originally, it was 2002. By that point, I think DVDs were quite popular, DVD players. 2002 is, right on the cusp of when things are starting to really change, especially in the online world, where we're starting to have an introduction to social media that's going to be coming soon. YouTube then comes out a few years later, and that's just going to introduce a whole new world, a whole new way of paleting your entertainment, your media, and old media as well that you may never have had access to before. But this is also one of those weird kind of film inside of a film sort of things where we're looking at aspects of film manipulation, but within a manipulative narrative, if that makes any sense. With all movies, we sit there and we watch it and we attach ourselves to certain characters or certain scenes, and we see certain things in them that remind us of our own experience. So we can perceive the film through that lens. And the main character is supposed to be our everyman, somebody that's easy to kind of fall into almost as a blank slate. And in this case, Naomi Watts is our main character as Rachel, and she's a reporter trying to discover the mystery behind this weird tape that is being passed around, where apparently once you watch it, you die exactly 7 days later. Watts is just such a wonderful, wonderful actress. She's very believable, very, very visceral, and I think she would have been the perfect kind of icy Hitchcock blonde had she been born maybe a generation earlier. But even when I was talking about projecting yourself onto a movie, I think I'm going to use myself here. I normally try not to do that, but I think it works here and it's a good example of what I mean, just with the overall point I'm trying to make. So when I watch the movie, I see Rachel very much as myself. Like, I can certainly relate to her. Maybe not her personality necessarily, but more just in terms of her function. She is a reporter trying to investigate something that is very hypnotic, and she's trying to peel back the layers behind the smoke and mirrors of it. Find the wizard behind the curtain and break the illusion. And don't I do the same thing when I watch films, to a greater extent than I would say your average person. Everybody wants to watch a horror film or something like that, and they want to be scared by it. They want that initial, immersion into it, and oftentimes they don't want to know about the behind the scenes stuff, because that breaks the illusion. It kind of ruins the mystique of it. And yet here I am trying to do pretty much the opposite thing. I'm trying to look at it almost though I'm performing surgery, or I'm a mechanic and I'm popping the hood of the car, as I always like to say. I'm trying to critically analyze the pieces and how they create the illusion. Now, by doing this, you have to wonder sometimes, and it's something that I do wonder quite often for myself, does that defeat the overall purpose of the effect of it, or is it illuminating? Rather complex answer, I find, and it's always shifting in my mind as well. But when I look at a movie like Un Chien Andalou, I can talk about the homoeroticism, I can talk about the sexuality, all that stuff, and that's fine, but does it necessarily matter? Is there something deeper going on in terms of wanting to break all of that down? Am I breaking it down more because I want to learn about it? Or is it because, it's a sort of weird means of control for myself? Because as a reviewer, you're always trying to remain objective, and you don't want to be too biased when you're talking about the criticisms, but naturally, you can't help that certain things, certain personal things that happen to you are going to kind of bleed into it. And I don't know, just in terms of watching it this time, that's how I saw Rachel. I saw her as a metaphor for that kind of person, the YouTube essayist or the film reviewer on YouTube, the person trying to break down the mystery of the thing. And when Rachel gets her first, big call to adventure where she is, she makes the choice to begin investigating the tape, she does have an incentive, because it apparently killed her niece, because her niece died 1 week after watching it. So she already has an emotional tie to it on an external level. But as she starts discovering more about the tape and starts really breaking down everything frame by frame and learning about the history of it, she learns about the horses, she learns about Anna, and of course her daughter, Samara. I think that she can likely relate to that in her own ways, though not overtly, but she, like Anna, is a mother. And she's a single mother. She's not a bad parent, but she's a single parent. She's busy. She doesn't have maybe all the time in the world to spend with her son. So she can latch onto that aspect of things, just a sort of maybe disconnect between herself and her son, whether by choice or not. And then just kind of this missing paternal link, which, it comes out later with the father, and we find out how he's maybe betrayed Anna in certain ways. And again, part of what's so interesting about this movie is how it's delving into the kind of the meta aspects of things, because with this tape, with all its surrealism and its experimental imagery and all of that, with modern day technology, you can sit there and fast forward, you can rewind, you can play in slow motion, you can freeze frame. She's printing individual frames out and getting very obsessive over it. And, this wouldn't have been possible maybe 10 years ago. The way we experience film now is very, very different than how it was experienced, back in the day. Like in the 20s, you could probably see Un Chien Andalou once, and you probably wouldn't see it again for decades and decades. And maybe if you survive that long, it might be revived or something at a movie theater in the 1960s. So there's this mystique about it and how you recall certain things in your memory and how it resonates with you, because it's very different than being able to break it down the way that we can. But now it's free on YouTube, and you can look it up, and you can make a film essay about what it means or whatever. And with Rachel, she's trying to remain objective, because she kind of has to in order to save herself and her family and all that. She is also the victim because, naturally she watched the tape. She had to as a reporter. Then her son, of course, watches the movie. Now that is when, the risk becomes suddenly much higher for her. She's not only trying to break down the illusion now, but she's also an active participant in it. She's falling into it, losing herself in the illusion. And maybe she may not be able to find her way out by the end of this. Now that's a very, very fascinating sort of thing, and maybe not explored in the ways that I feel like that it could have to make the movie fully realized. But the way it expresses it is very cool, just in terms of mood and everything. All that's done very well. And at a certain point, you start to see how the dream world and the film world start to converge, because when she's seen the movie, of course, all of that starts to leak into her subconscious, and it starts coming through her dreams in very intense ways. And then, you see certain images of the tape, and there's like a switch. There might be an image of Samara sitting there being questioned, and suddenly Rachel is there. It's all really creepy, and they can do a lot with just an image and make it very haunting, and it stays with you. That's, to me, the overall power of The Ring. When it comes to horror movies and kind of the shifting landscape of them, how they've changed over time, I love that this movie is a sort of double-sided commentary on that. Whether it's aware of that or not, that's how it seemed to me. Just an experience of how things are shifting in this upcoming generation. The age of the academics, the cinephile snobs, and also just the age of the conspiracy theorists and all that, because the tape does have that sort of feeling to it. It feels like garbled imagery from the 20th century in fragments. The whole freeze frame the Kennedy assassination at 14 seconds and you can see something new, that sort of stuff. But there is a line in the movie that I think is very existential in a lot of ways and very interesting, and I think it's the key to the whole thing. And that line is, before you die, you see the ring. And that is the whole death and rebirth metaphor, and the idea that no matter what in life, we're always trying to climb back into the womb in some form. How all of this relates to our dreams, how we take that from our dreams and bring it into our entertainment so that other people can sort of attach themselves in a way that they may not be very aware of. And it's all in the movie. I mean, just the idea of the neglected little girl, Samara, she always wants her mommy, crawling through the television almost like she's being reborn in a way, and then she's taking us back with her. So there's just a lot of very cool insights that just come together, and they create really a beautifully constructed horror film, a very solid movie that to me is, again, about how we project ourselves onto the narratives that we see before us. Because movies are so similar to our dreams, we sometimes don't even realize how much films have formed the basis for our ideas and just, our thoughts, our values. There is a strange flow state between reality and fantasy where at times we can't distinguish the difference. And I think that is what this movie does really, really well. It's able to blur those lines in a way that is really terrifying. It makes you feel like you are really losing control. And horror movies, of course, are that manipulation. We watch them so we can get the feeling, the taste of being scared without the real risk, right? And even when we sleep, we don't have control over what's happening because we're sleeping. It's just happening. And we don't have control when we watch a movie either. It's been written already. So now breaking down the movie the way that I do and the way that a lot of cinephiles do, especially in the academic world and all that, is in somehow our way of kind of creating that control for ourselves. The Ring to me includes so much of that, but it's still very much rooted in traditional values. And that idea of film just bleeding into our reality and impacting our lives, especially when it's out of our control in the way that it is with Rachel, is really, really scary. And with this movie, it's always kind of underlying. It's not over the top for the most part throughout. And I think that it's very deceptive. It's smarter than it appears. Even just with the opening of the film, how it deceives you. You're watching it and you're like, oh, this is gonna be lame. You're like, it's a typical, it seems like one of those dumb slasher movies. You even have the young teenage girls in their school uniforms. But then no, it starts taking you in this different direction. You realize, no, this is a very sophisticated kind of slow building horror film. And it's constantly surprising you. And what I love is when you think that the movie is over, when you think that, oh, isn't it lovely that like Rachel has found a way to win the war, to see Samara's demise as a way of bringing her family together. Oh, isn't that sweet? And the movie says, nope, we fooled you. We're not going to give you any of that at all because this is a vicious cycle that is never going to stop. And I love that. I just love how the movie is constantly manipulating you in ways that it's very aware of. It reminds me of Videodrome and those kind of meta commentaries, but it also reminds me in tone of movies like Rosemary's Baby at times, which, you know, I of course think that's a far stronger film in comparison. In terms of aesthetic, I think that the color grading of The Ring is way too over the top. It's grayish and bluish to the point where it almost looks green, like The Matrix or something like that. But in the case of this movie, it's just a little bit too on the nose. It kind of flattens the worlds too much for me. Whereas with Rosemary's Baby, I look at that color palette and, you know, it's distinct, but it's not hitting you over the head with it. You know, it feels like while you're watching it, something is just slightly off. It feels like, I said this before, that it feels like there's something rotting inside you or like an itch you can't scratch. And to me, that's just more effective. Just like the whiff of it. It's just a hint of this weird feeling. And I wish that The Ring had just learned to dial it back just a bit. And I think it would make it much more effective. And I also think it would be really interesting if they took these ideas to an even more existential level, to an even more metaphysical sort of place in the ways that you do see from a movie like Videodrome. Had it been on that level, this would have been a masterpiece. And even maybe if David Lynch had made the movie, I think it could have been a masterpiece. Especially since he had just come off Mulholland Drive, which maybe he still had that in him to make a movie on that level. But not to take away from this film, I really do want to stress that I think it is really, really good. I was very impressed by it, and I can see why it's become such a modern day horror classic and why so many people find it to be effective. Old school, mature kind of tension building while also being quite cerebral as well. So I mean, of course, I'm sure you've already seen it, but watch it again. I think maybe you'd be surprised just how good it is and how effective it is and what you can take away from it. So yeah, that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters there. You guys are incredible as always. The link to support is below. Also, I have a website below that where I sell commission portraits, drawings, and prints, things like that. I am an artist, so if you're interested in that, you can always contact me. And then there's my social media information below that. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you want to. Catch you next time.